Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well today. Well, this is the introductory and overview video for free trade and protectionism, the next unit in the international economics curriculum. Listen, this unit really focuses on the arguments for and against protectionism, and also then focuses on how countries would go about protecting themselves from international trade. So by the end of this unit, you should be able to obviously define free trade, give examples of and evaluate arguments for protectionism, explain and give examples of and evaluate arguments against protectionism, explain and illustrate free trade. You should be able to define, explain, illustrate, and give examples of the types of protectionism, right? And also evaluate from diagrams the effects of imposing a tariff, setting a quota, or giving a subsidy on different stakeholders. And then, of course, in the end, you always got to be able to evaluate the effect of different types of trade protection. So this is the beginning of that journey. Don't get overwhelmed by any of that information. It's all going to make sense in the end. But these are the things you should be able to do by the end of this unit. So first, free trade. What is it? Well, here's a definition. It's said to take place, free trade is said to take place between countries when there are no barriers to trade in place by governments or international organizations. It's just like it sounds, right? It takes place between countries internationally when there are no barriers to trade in place by governments of both countries or international organizations. So, quite simply, goods and services are allowed to move freely between countries. Okay, so free trade means frictionless movement of goods. The government just says, hey, that's cool, sure. We live in Chile, we'll buy your Argentinian products, no problem. Yeah, okay, no problem. We live in Mexico, sure, we'll accept your US products and you accept our Mexican products. Okay, that's great. Right? Sure, we live in Japan, sure, we'll take your Korean products, and Korea, you take our Japanese products, right? That is free trade. So overall, the way this unit's going to run, we're going to talk about arguments in favor of protectionism. We'll talk about the types of protectionism. We'll talk about ways in which administrative barriers, that's a nice way of saying, the way in which governments can put up these little roadblocks to make free trade not possible. And then we'll talk about the arguments against protectionism, which is to say we'll talk about the arguments for free trade, but we kind of already have, because the gains from international trade are the arguments for free trade. So if you saw the video on why do countries trade and you understand those 7 reasons, then you realize that these are also the arguments against protectionism, right? Because protectionism and free trade are opposites. But before we go any further, take a look at, there's some key terms that I want to make sure you have. There are 4. The first one is protectionism, right? We could talk about it all we want, but we need to have a nice, useful definition that you could use in an essay. So protectionism is the use of tariffs, quotas, subsidies, or administrative barriers aimed at making domestic producers more competitive with foreign producers by limiting the quantity of imports into the nation. Right? I've talked about this macroeconomic bubble that exists over the top of every country, right? And if that bubble is really hard to get through because there's a tariff, a quota, subsidy, or administrative barriers, then there's not going to be free trade. Okay? And the reason the governments do that is to protect their own people. Governments are only interested in their own people because their own people are the people that elect them, right? So governments are looking out for their own people always. Tariff. A tariff, or tariffs, are taxes placed on imported goods, services, or resources. A tariff increases the cost of the imported good, right? It comes in at $1, and then the government slaps a 50-cent tax on it, and now all of a sudden, in order to get it into the country, or if you want to buy it in that country, you have to pay $1.50. So a tariff increases the cost of imported good, reducing their supply and causing the price by domestic consumers, or price of domestic consumers, to rise. Therefore, domestic quantity supplied is greater than it would be without the tariff. There's the impact of it. Protective subsidy. A protective subsidy, definition, is a payment from the government to domestic producers meant to increase domestic consumption of their goods or to promote the export of their good to the rest of the world. So basically it's saying, like, okay, let's take corn, for example. If there's a government subsidy to corn, then the result will be that the United States, let's say, will produce more corn, as a result of the subsidy, because that lowers the factors of production, and that the cost of the factors of production, and as a result that'll lower the cost of corn, and therefore U.S. producers will be more competitive on the world market. The subsidy, the impact would be increases the domestic supply of a good and therefore increases the quantity consumed by domestic consumers. And lastly, before we move on, you got to know what a quota is. A quota is a physical limit on the quantity of a good, service, or resource that may be imported. Think of a quota as a limit, right? A quota means that you are only going to accept so many tons of steel into your country. And if it's 200,000 tons of steel, of Japanese steel, and then the first 2,000 tons of Japanese steel that comes into your country, get in, and then after that, nothing, right? So a quota is a physical limit on the number of goods that can come, the quantity of goods or service or resources that can come into your country. So a quota will result in a shortage of imports in the short run, which drives up the domestic price and leads to domestic producers to increase their quantity supplied. There are videos on the protective tariff, a protective subsidy, and a protective quota. Check them out individually for more clarity on that. So, but of course, all of these lead to a misallocation of resources and lead to a loss of total welfare globally. Protectionism is government intervention in the international market, and as a result, there's going to be a messing up of the natural equilibrium of goods and services, the prices of goods and services, and as a result, you're going to have a misallocation of resources. It all comes back around and around and around to you. Okay? Cool. That's the awesome thing about economics. It just keeps building and building and building, and your understanding gets broader and broader and broader, and now you're building your understanding on an international scale of the impact of really simple supply and demand forces. All right, coolio, my friends. I hope you found this video to be helpful, and we'll talk to you in a bit.